Brothers and sisters, there is no job in this church that's menial or unimportant. I remember as a kid growing up, we got these chores, and nobody wanted cleaning the toilet. I frankly don't like cleaning toilets to this day. But I'm told from the research that when a new family comes in the doors of the church, if they have children, there are two things that the woman will look at. The first is the nursery, and the second is the bathrooms. And that a decision will be made on the church long before they've heard the preacher, before they've heard the band, or before they've gotten a feel for what we're all like. Somebody that's scrubbing a toilet in this church may bring a new family. There's no such thing as an unimportant job. Now, if you looked in your bulletins and thought we were missing something, you are correct. We still are a praying church. We just accidentally seem to have left the prayer inserts. So you will find them at the back of the church, and for anybody that's new or need one, they're right next to the Bibles. And the Bibles are our gift to you. If you need a Bible, take one, make it yours. Please do not return it. This is not Pew Bibles, because this is not a Pew church. This is a gift to you because we want everyone to know and to be able to study God's Word. We're finishing up the series on chasing today. I'm very excited for Jason's return because I believe that next week, if not in the very near future, we're starting a series on prayer. And that series is going to be followed by a series on spiritual warfare, both of which are vital topics in the life of any church that wants to grow. But today we're going to be talking about chasing security. I hope you understand that we have become a generation and perhaps a nation that is overwhelmed with fear and anxiety. According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in America, affecting 18.1% of the population every year. That means that if you were to look around right now, 1 in every 5 of you suffers from anxiety. And if you are actually looking around, it's probably you. Okay? Panic disorder, which is an extreme form of anxiety, affects 2.7% of all Americans. Major, and this is where things begin to get scary for me as a youth pastor, major depressive disorder is the leading cause of disability in America for ages 15 to 44.3. I don't know how they figured the 0.3, but I'll leave it there. But the most scary figure for me is that anxiety disorders affect 25.1% of children between the ages of 13 and 18 years of age. If you have any doubts about that, I can tell you, I see it every time I'm working with the kids. They're stressed. They're overwhelmed. Some of them are being bullied. The bullying increases the anxiety levels. They're going through hurtful and scary times. You know, when I was going to school, the biggest fear I had actually happened one day, and that's that I rushed to school. I was late, and I forgot my belt. By the way, I haven't learned my lesson. The vice principal saw me as I entered the door, and he gave me this finger that nobody ever wanted to see back in those days. And I walked into his office, and he handed me a length of white rope. And he said, "You will wear this all day long." Now, we can't comprehend that in this day and age, but that was the biggest worry I had. I didn't have the other big worry that some of my friends in school had, and that was if he thought your hair was too long, a bowl went on your head, and he just shaved right around the edge of the bowl. I never let my hair get that way in those days. But I had the chance to talk to some of our kids a week ago and hear them say things like, "My mom was afraid to send me to school this morning." And I don't blame her. We live in such a very different world, and it's stressful for all of us, but especially it's stressful for the kids. I want us to be aware of this, and I want us to be aware of how serious an issue it is. I am one of the 2.7% of Americans that has experienced panic attack. In fact, the first time or the second time, I can't recall, that I experienced it, I was coming back from a hospital call. And I was so convinced that I was dying that I pulled into the Wahoo emergency room and told them that I was having a heart attack. The doctor came in and he looked at me and he said, well, actually, he didn't say anything. He didn't know that I can read upside down very well. It's not a skill that I've ever been able to market, but I can do it. And I saw him write down on the sheet, anxiety. And that's when it dawned on me that something was happening in my life that not only was frightening, but needed to be dealt with. What causes our fear and anxiety? I think it's a lot of things. Some of them are real and we have little control over. If you're a kid and you're going to school and you know that as soon as you get in the door of the school, there are kids there that are going to pick on you and make your life miserable, you don't have a lot of control over that. And it can create a lot of anxiety. We go through the same things though, don't we? I suffered through years of a bishop that shall forever remain unnamed. However, she caused me great anxiety. Some of you have had bosses that are stressful and make it hard to enjoy and do the work that you want to do. But I think some of it has to do with our things. You know, I never could have envisioned as a kid seeing the day. You know, we went to the store and got a phone for $1, $5 if we were fancy. And now I'm sitting on top of an $800 phone. I never thought I'd see the day that I had an $800 phone. When we have stuff like that, it does increase the anxiety level. We worry about losing it. We worry about getting stolen. We keep so much information on it. My old phone had no information whatsoever. It couldn't even tell me who to call. This phone has all my friends, all their addresses, all their phone numbers, pastoral notes. I worry that it never get into the wrong hands. We love things. My daughter cannot understand my anxiety in life because she thinks a $20,000 car is normal. Growing up, $20,000 was a house for a rich person. 2 or 3,000 for a car was expensive. And I don't think the salary has progressed progressively. I have a friend who's concerned about security. He has a beautiful house and he's living there all alone now. But he's put in the very latest security systems. If he loses his phone, he may never get back in his house again. If you try to open the door and he has the alarm set, everything goes off and the police get called. You'd think he'd be very secure, but I'm fearful as I talk to him that he is being scammed right now. It's a shame we live in a society where older people who have little can have even that taken away from them by people who just don't seem to care. I want us to be aware of these things. There are so many ways, so many things, and we don't have time to really get into the things that cause anxiety. But I would be willing to bet that the person that's sitting in the pew I spent a year in pew churches. The person who's sitting in the chair right now who's saying, what's he talking about? Life is good and I've never felt anxiety. I would bet that you are the rarity. Most of us have dealt with anxiety, have lived with anxiety, sometimes temporary, sometimes it's been a long part of our lives. So the question arises, what is the solution to our fear and anxiety? And here I want to give a prelude to what Jason's going to be getting into in the near future. I know it's not popular to talk about spiritual forces anymore. And I've even heard people say that it's outdated, that in a scientific age, spiritual stuff is just silly. And yet this scientific age still hasn't figured out how the ancient Egyptians got giant stones stacked up in the shape of a pyramid. And the best some people can come up with is a alien nation smarter than us came and taught them how to do it. I think it may be time that we give ancient civilizations their due and say they weren't necessarily that dumb. They did a lot of things we're still trying to figure out. And one of those things is they understood faith. And they understood that there were forces in this life that were beyond their control. The Israelites at one point in time were feeling insecure. Growing up in the 60s, I can't hardly imagine this Bible verse, but they turned to Egypt for help. For those of you who didn't grow up in the 60s, Egypt invaded Israel, and Israel took 6 days to settle the whole Middle East. I'm still quite convinced they can. But at this point in time, they went to Egypt. And God responds through the prophet Isaiah, and he says, "Woe to you, O Israel! Woe to you who seek security in weaponry, but not in the arms of your God." I think if we're going to find the solution to anxiety and stress in our life, we have to quit chasing things. We have to quit chasing all the things that make us insecure, that give us anxiety. And we have to ground our lives more effectively in God. Brothers and sisters, death has always been a part of my life. I remember staying awake when I was younger and just worrying what would happen if my mom or dad died. especially my mom. I wasn't that close to my dad growing up. We were just different. He had fought a world war. I hadn't. I loved books. I still have more books than anybody I know except the library. My dad, well, he really thought books were a waste of time and money. I don't think he ever read one in his life, unless it was the Bible when he was young. He didn't read it when he was older. My worst nightmare came true when I was 18 years of age. I had just finished my first year at the University of Illinois, which, by the way, is the reason I will never cheer for Nebraska against Illinois. They will beat us, but they are my alumni, and I will never cheer against my alma mater. But I had finished up my first year, and I came home. My mom had had a surgery. And I needed a job, and she told me to get looking for it so I could get back to college, which had been her dream. At about 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, I heard a scream from my sister, and I went downstairs to discover that my mother was never coming home from the hospital. She was supposed to come home that morning. But a blood clot had broke loose and hit both lungs simultaneously, and my mother was dead. I think in some ways it may have been less hard for me than for the rest of the family because I was in college and beginning to break away. But I had a brother and a sister that were still in elementary school, and I know they really struggled with it. I have to tell you that as I get older, I'm also aware that death is something real. I don't have the energy I used to. As my best friend in the world pointed out to me, I don't have the hair that I used to. I don't have much of anything that I used to. And at 70 years of age, I'm aware that I've lived a long life. And death is a reality that I have to face. So I want us to be aware of how a Christian faces and looks at death, how we deal with our anxieties, how we deal with our stress. And I invite you to turn to the 23rd Psalm. It begins out, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." This psalm is telling us that God cares about us. Okay? We do not have a God who sits in the heavens and doesn't know who we are. The Bible tells us that our God made us and that he intimately knows us and loves us. The image the Bible uses is that of a shepherd. And I have to tell you, I've heard all the arguments about this. One of the preachers who wrote a book on the 23rd Psalm said sheep are stupid. They need a shepherd. One of my friends who sheared sheep said sheep are very smart. I don't know. He sheared them. I'm not sure which it is. But I know that if sheep are dumb, it's still a good analogy because most of the time I'm way too dumb in life and the things I do. If they're smart, that's all right too, because there are times I can be very smart. But the reality is what the 23rd Psalm is telling me is there are a lot of things in my life that are beyond my control. But that I have a God who loves me and cares about what's happening to me. Now, don't get me wrong, because sometimes I hear people say, this God punishes me. He hurts me. I have this because God wanted to warn me. Or sometimes I hear people say that God doesn't really care because bad things happen in my life. I hear people say other things about that, but they're all wrong. Bad things happen because you and I are part of a world that's not what God intended. It's not about Adam and Eve who started it all. It's about the fact that we continue it every day. But our God loves us. And he understands that the powers of evil at work in this world. And he understands that at times those powers are going to touch our lives, and that's scary. But he doesn't want us to live with anxiety and fear. He wants us to know that he loves us, and that it doesn't matter what we're dealing with, that God is greater than that. The next verse in the 23rd Psalm says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The psalmist, who was David, is telling us this. It doesn't matter what we walk through. Every one of us have dark moments of life when we're walking through that shadow of dark. Every one of us will face those moments. Moments that are so overwhelming that they tear at the soul. And eventually, all of us will face the ultimate valley when we walk in the shadow of death. But God tells us that we do not need to be afraid or anxious about life because he's with us. And his love will sustain us. I have to tell you that if there's one thing I have learned in life, it's this. I have walked through dark valleys that I never hoped anybody else would walk through. But God has always been with me. I may not have realized it at the time. There have been times that I said, where in the world was God? And then I look back. Any of you ever done that? You get out of the valley and things are looking better, and you look back and you say, oh, wow, I'm sure God put that person in my life just for that purpose right now. Or I didn't even think about the fact that God was acting at that moment in that way. I have never been in a dark valley that I have not seen the hand of God walking me through it. We have never been told that we will not suffer. In fact, Jesus said that those who follow him will be persecuted. Most of us have avoided that. But living in a world that's dark, we will suffer. We will go through dark valleys. But the God who loves us will be there and will be our strength and our help. So how does the Christian deal with fear? I think first of all, we be honest. If we're dealing with anxiety, if we're fearful about something, we need to acknowledge it, not pretend it's not there. Pretending it's not there leads to more serious things like panic attacks. So we acknowledge it. If we need to, we talk to somebody, a good friend, pastor, if necessary, a counselor. We let them know what we're going through. We let them know what we're struggling with, because sometimes just sharing it makes a difference. Secondly, we turn to God. I have spent so much time in my life worrying about issues. I've always said I love Jesus's scripture, which one of you by worrying can grow an inch. I thought if he had width in mind that I could tell him I have, but I've never been able to add an inch to my height by worrying. There's no point in worry. I saw a research study that said that 80% of the things we worry about never happen. Now that leaves 20% to worry about. But no. Take the worry to God. Pray to him, seek his guidance, seek his help. And finally, Christians are people who don't sit still in the face of anxiety. We find security in doing what's needed. I will always remember Columbine because I had just been invited to be a member of the crisis team at the local school. And I was on the way to the first meeting when the radio reported that the first shots had gone off and that people were dead in Columbine High School. Brothers and sisters, I am so proud of some of our youth. It may be happening elsewhere, but I've just seen the indications at Southwest are planning a walkout. I don't know if that's the best way, that's for them, but they're doing something. They're saying we shouldn't have to worry about school. That's what Christians do. We take action.